Hi, everyone. This is Ricky Spencer, and welcome to 2024 Voices series for the Sociology of Media. And today we're speaking with Rob Harrison. Rob Harrison is a freelance journalist, and he's going to deep dive everything into what is journalism in 2024 with all these different ideas that we're being bombarded with. We're going to also look at something called fact checking, which I've touched on briefly a couple of episodes before, but now we're going to really talk to someone who was actually hired to fact check. And what does fact checking mean? And why is it important for all of us in different research spaces to have somebody like Rob come into and consult with um, to help us understand what information we're trying to put out? So, welcome, Rob, to our web podcast series.
Hi, Ricky. It's good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your journey, Rob. What inspired you to pursue a career in journalism?
It's a very big question. It was just it seemed like a very natural progression, really. I think it really grew out of my love of history. As a kid, I actually still to this day, I've always sort of, like had one fiction book alongside a non-fiction book, and I've been reading them both at the same time. And I I always loved reading history and to be able to contextualize the world around me. Why have things that I'm seeing or experiencing or things happening right now, why are they happening? And what is the context? Obviously, pick an event going on in the world, and there is sometimes a long history leading up to why that thing is happening, or and I think that love of history and desire to be a journalist really grew out of that, as well as just a pretty natural sense of curiosity for the world. Like, I was pretty fortunate to be, in environments when I was younger where people really encouraged me to ask questions, and
Mm.
I'm really grateful for that experience and being able to sort of follow where my curiosity takes me. And my love of journalism really does come from that, as well as I think as the more and more I read about history, the growing political views that I had, my sense of compassion for people, and my care just for a better world, really.
Mm. And I'm just throwing this now to you, like when you were growing up,
Mm.
you grew up obviously as, well, I dare say millennial. You're part of the millennial generation, would you
I'm
say?
actually Gen Z.
Gen Z, okay.
Yeah, I'm
So,
just outside of the millennial
right.
bracket.
So you grew up with internet or access to
Yeah,
the internet. What
yeah.
did journalism look like to you growing up?
I mean, my earliest experiences are just reading a lot of Wikipedia pages, I would
Mm.
say, which I feel like is a very common experience for people I know who are my age who are just interested about things. And I would also read like my mum's dad, even though I never met him, because he sadly passed before I was born, was an English lecturer at a university in Coventry, England. So my mum actually had a lot of the books that he had, and some actually I think he stole from Coventry University. Um, which, yeah, if they're listening, we're sorry as a family. Uh, but um, so I just remember, reading those books, and I can't remember any in particular, but books dating back to like the 80s that he was, lecturing about back then. And even though it was even even though it didn't really thankfully didn't really seem to inspire me to produce work for them, but we would have we would have Sky News on the news every morning.
Mm,
Um, Pretty much like for quite a few years, and that sort of died down as became a teenager, and it was like, why am I why am I listening to this?
mm,
But that is definitely another story. Yeah, and it was mostly that, as well as reading just any newspaper from back to front I could get my hands on as a child.
mm. That's quite interesting, isn't it? Like, when you said you're getting your hands on a newspaper, because I'm thinking
Yeah.
there may be some people who are, born now in a millennium who are doing their PhDs and that who are thinking, really, a newspaper? You grabbed a hand newspaper. And I guess that's sort of like, for me, that's when I saw, oh, that's what a journalism does. Because
Mm,
obviously I grew up in an era where, you know, to me, journalism meant either seeing someone on television
mm,
or seeing something on a newspaper that was written. And I thought, wow, what about the power? So going from that, you were mentioning earlier about your desire to see, to understand the world around you. Can
mm,
you tell us a little bit about doing your course? Because you did your degree at RMIT and you
mm.
studied journalism there. Did your sense of social responsibility kind of form further while you were doing your course, or was it something you already had there in your worldview?
It was definitely in my radar. I think I studied journalism straight out of high school. As I said before, big lover of history and reading about history. So I did some history classes in high school, in the last 2 years of high school, and um, especially in my last year of high school, we spent a lot of time looking at the journalists who existed during times of different upheaval, and that really connected the dots for me as to how important the responsibility of being a journalist is. It's not just like you should be documenting everything you see, but it's like how important it is to document the right things that are happening and the most impactful things that are happening in order to, yeah, put things into the public discourse.
Hmm. So how do
So
you see the role then of journalism? Is it to inform or persuade?
yeah, it's a very interesting dilemma. I think philosophers all around the world for such a long time have talked about like objectivity and
Hmm.
whether we can, as journalists, as people, actually achieve objectivity. I personally don't. I think everybody has a bias,
Hmm.
whether they are aware of it or not. The news that they consume, everything that they consume, is because of their bias and their views and how they grew up. Like any number of factors contributing to who they are as people determines a bias and the things that they do, including the news that they read and for people like me, the news that they create.
Hmm. It's
So,
interesting. I was going to add to your point, if you can explain to the
mm,
audiences. When I grew up, I remember newspapers were to inform. That was something. But I've heard now people say news to consume. What does it mean when they say news to consume?
it's interesting. It's interesting wording. I think the change, and I think a lot of people would just overlook the change in the wording, but I think a lot of time with spending time doing fact checking and
Hmm.
just being someone who reads a lot, the change in words can be can be intentional and sometimes very, very important. And I think it's very reflective of a world which now produces news for the sake of getting more and more clicks, more and
Mm-hmm.
more ads, and more revenue. So it's less about informing people and telling people, what they should be knowing about, things happening near them, around them, or like elsewhere in the world to expand someone's worldview, but and is now instead more about just creating things that people will click on so they can get more money and a fatter wallet, especially in the era of social media. I think that transition has just been sped up by social media.
Mm. I was going to ask you too, and you touched on a really interesting point, fact
Mm,
checking. This is something that became more and more into my kind of worldview, or kind of on my radar, especially when COVID-19 dominated the world, the
mm.
global landscape. And I noticed that you were also employed as a fact checker. So can you tell our audience and what is a fact checker, and why is it so important to have a organization that does fact checking?
That's a great question. I think fact checking is in the area of social media, it's just more important than it's ever been to fact check the news. And organizations who do it, like ABC, RMIT Fact Check,
Hmm.
so important to not just the political stage, but the public stage. Um, it's so important to everyone that we support organizations like that because of their work they're doing. Fact checking is ultimately about it's there in the title. It's checking that the things that you are reading are correct, and that is seeing beyond the bias, seeing beyond the agenda, and seeing what actually happened. Something like that phrase. There's a phrase, and I'm going to paraphrase it. So if any of your listeners are hearing me butcher this, I really apologize. It's something about if someone tells you it's raining outside, you're not going to go and ask other people if it's raining outside. You're going to look out the window.
Mm.
And that's a very, very important view, I think, for how fact checking works. It's trying to move through all of the different perspectives out there and actually trying to discern what the actual truth is.
Mm. And tell me, Rob, when you were employed doing fact checking, what happens when you do some checking and someone that's written something or stated something in the media discourse is incorrect? How does that then, what does your, like, say, RMIT fact checking, what do they do? Do they contact the person, or what's the process?
That's why the work that fact RMIT Fact Check does is so important, is because they find out when people in the they're in a very public positions.
Mhm.
It's not just about proving politicians wrong or just like it's not gotcha journalism. It's saying people who are going out like this very interview, who are going out into the world, speaking to media and saying things, they RMIT fact check are discerning whether that's true because what they are saying has a large reach and a large impact potentially on people.
Mm.
And we see this all the time when politicians, people in the media say things which gets traction out in the world, wherever it may be, and creates a whole like, you name the panic of, existences of a certain type of people in the world. And you have to look at how that spread and if what the public figure is saying to like kind of create a panic and benefit from that.
Rob, what does uncovering the truth mean in journalism terms?
sort of when at my time at RMIT Fact Check, it was very much about looking at all of the different ways that information is, I guess, what we would call would spun. So all of the different ways that things are spoken about, and it's good for this reasons, or it's bad for this reason, and you have to actually discern, like you have to uncover and wade through all of those areas and reasons to talk about the truth behind all of those layers, especially when it gets to like numbers and statistics, and like the economy is XYZ because of XYZ, or this stadium is going to cost this much because of this. So there are many situations, like I was saying before, where public figures will appear in the media, and these spaces get a lot of traction and have a lot of impact. It's been very important that the truth behind the things that these public figures are saying is exposed, not just to prove them wrong or to make them look bad or anything like that, but purely just because if people are going to go out there into the media and say right or wrong things based on their own agenda, then they should be held accountable for when it's wrong, or you know based on a political viewpoint that they have.
And drawing on from that, it follows to me the word freedom comes in. And one of the things I wanted to now ask you is, how do you value freedom, like to report on diverse topics and express your, I guess, your positionality through, the field of journalism? And what are some of the things that need to be considered?
Yeah, press freedom is huge, especially as a very proud queer and non-binary person. It's very important to me to be able to report without fear,
Mm.
and knowing that I can, report on things without, being shot or being arrested. It's just, it's obviously so important that that journalists continue to do the work they do to report with or without press freedom. But yeah, it's really important that we continue to report on things with the knowledge that we can do so.
I sometimes get upset. I guess it's because I'm not a journalist. When I see that people get attacked on not so much their content, but the person they are. And I notice that there are the stations out there in the media at the moment that will attack the journalist in terms of, say, their positionality, whether, like you just mentioned, if you're trans or queer or
Mm.
non-binary, and use that. Why do some media spaces revert to that as a means to discredit or use that as a weapon to for like, why don't journalists play fair?
Mm. Very good question. I would say ultimately because of the agenda behind, who they're doing the journalism for, right? So I really don't like when people attack the personalities of marginalized communities, especially people from marginalized communities are in the media, because we don't really, it's Australia's media is not that diverse. It's not as diverse as people think. And it's also very important to be able to have spaces like the one that we're in now, albeit an online space where we can just talk about this.
One of the things, Rob, that I was watching a show on the ABC, and I can't, the name of the show escapes me, but it was about a journalist, a gay journalist in the 80s, and how he had to hide his identity of being queer.
Mm,
It was during that time, it was my generation when AIDS and the news itself, especially on television, was seen very heteronormative. You
yeah.
know, there was always the male anchor and the female presenter,
Mm,
and it was very binary. How do you think that has changed, or has it even shifted, in your opinion? I mean, we look, and I want you to sort of consider we've got ABC, we've got a few people, but we don't really have, do we have openly people queer or diverse on mainstream
mm,
news settings?
mm. I mean, it really depends, right? I mean, do you want, sh should we celebrate all diversity? Like, sure, sometimes diversity, and a lot of times, sorry, is diversity is a very good thing, but sometimes diversity in places, you know, like we shouldn't celebrate diversity at places like Sky News, like conservative voices, because these places exist to discredit, people of color, trans people, like day in, day out, are perpetuating and disseminating transphobia, racism, misogyny, you name it. We shouldn't celebrate diversity within that space because ultimately it's you have to focus your anger at the system which creates things like racism and transphobia, you name it.
And that's the sort of difficulty I see because part of me, I'm in conflicted because I want to see more people that look like me, in positions where, and maybe it's an old-fashioned view, reading the news, of a trans person and being seen not for the fact that they're trans, but that they are a good journalist reporter or delivering the information. But it's really hard because our identity comes through, the screen, the way it's projected, and that's a real hard one. And I think you've just highlighted, well, if we have
Yeah.
that view, we've got to have the people like from Sky who will discredit. So how do you, I guess I'm trying to find out from your view now, where do you see the future of news presenting in the visual format? Do you see that we're kind of moving away from that model?
I think representation is super important. I genuinely still struggle with being a journalist, and I have, sometimes have quite a lot of imposter syndrome because
Hmm.
in many spaces, not just as a journalist, I'm moving through life in spaces where I've never seen an openly transgender person. And that's, I feel like that's such an important thing. But also, I think if people are going to argue that because if diversity improves, if representation improves, then that means there should be more of the voices which actively work to discredit and harm people from marginalized communities. It's never going to get anywhere, right? It's just going to be a total cycle of ebbing and flowing.
How does that also, Rob, how do we kind of come to terms with, we try and be diverse in our representation of journalists. And, we've now seen that their disability is becoming more visible in terms of those on screen. So I know that and I'm thinking of the ABC because I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe I'm wrong in main other commercial where we've got somebody who is in a chair and who does who's a journalist. We have someone who's visually impaired as well do journalism. Does that shape? Does that demonstrate to us that journalism as a profession is embracing diversity, or is that just tokenism?
Mm, mm. I really think it would depend on the organization and the kind of reporting that is happening.
It's a really hard one, and
It's a
I
very
guess that
hard
was
one.
a
It is a
hard
very hard
question, but
one.
I wanted to put it out there for people to think, what do we do? Because we want the person with the best skills
Yeah.
who's given that. But
Mm,
then we also want those who have been not allowed or given opportunities in the
yeah,
past to be
that's right.
able to present. So, and I guess there is no answer, but it's just some
Mm,
pondering. And the other
yeah.
thing I want to now throw at you, or literally speak.
Can I just say
Yeah,
something before
yeah,
we, sorry.
yeah, go
There
for it.
is a in the hallways of 3CR Community Radio, which I host a breakfast radio show
Oh,
every
yes.
week.
Yep.
In the hallways of 3CR Community Radio, there is a poster that says nothing about us without us. And I think that's a very good answer to your question. If people are going to produce news about trans people, about, XYZ marginalized community, it can't be from a person who isn't from that marginalized community. I don't want some like cisgendered person to be reporting on how hard it is and what they think being trans is like on a day-to-day basis, because they don't know really, do they?
And that's the
That's
window that we've had a lot with, and I'm not going to mention the commercial station that I grew up in, where they would say to people, "We're going to live on the pension for a week,"
mm,
and to see how hard it is, or dare I say, a couple of years ago, Struggle Street, when there was an SBS series about the plight of people living in Mount Druitt, and it was really voyeuristic and almost the word
yeah,
of journalism porn, where
yeah,
the viewer was sort of the spectacle as
yeah,
race. That was really not doing the cause or the
mm,
justice or the community any good because it was
yeah,
just highlighting stereotypes. So you
yeah,
make a really interesting point. Another thing I want to, I guess, throw at you, literally
yeah,
speaking, is AI. And how has
mm,
AI impacted you as a journalist? And where do you see that in the field of journalism? Will it
mm.
replace journalism like universities?
I don't think it will replace journalism. I think, sure, maybe it will replace um, people producing clickbait articles, which are created just to get as many clicks as on a website as possible. Sensationalized news, whatever you want to call it. But I think there are a lot of areas in which I'm very skeptical of AI, very skeptical of AI because I'm already always considering, again, like I am with the news that I read, whether it's created by a human or a robot, right? I'm always considering who created it and why are they saying it, and it really depends who is making AI. If a news organization says they're using AI, which AI, where did it come from? There should be transparency as to where it's coming from and who created it and the ins and outs. So it's not like some AI being used to do some of the very racist and harmful things that we've seen AI do, like target people of color
Mm.
when it's spotting faces, right? So for that reason, I think we should be very skeptical of AI as people and as journalists. And I hope that true journalism, which is, in my opinion, like news that has an impact and exists to hold truth to power and hold people in power accountable. I hope AI doesn't get to a point where it can replace us.
I don't think it will. I think
Mm,
it's in some ways it can aid, but as you rightly gave us the important thing, I think for all researchers who use AI to always consider, as you said, who is the people writing the AI? Who are the coders? Who are they being paid by? Who are the masters?
yep.
Going back to the works of Marx and Lenin, and knowing like who are the masters of who are the slaves, to know
Yeah.
where does the power is generating and what it does it mean for us.
Yeah.
Rob, where are you at the moment in terms of your career? Let's dive a little bit about what you're doing at the moment.
Well, pretty much all of my journalistic energy is being focused on the hour and a half radio show I produce and present
Hmm.
at 3CR in Fitzroy, Melbourne. And yeah, loving it. I can't say whether it's the beginning or end of my career, but for now, I'm truly, truly, truly loving being at a place which one is dedicated to platforming marginalized communities.
Hmm.
The 3CR was set up in the 70s by a bunch of communists to platform women and has grown into just such a wonderful environment where the people I broadcast alongside are not afraid to call people out, ask questions that dive beyond people's bias and really say like information is harmful. So I think, and especially as uh, a transgender person, it's very important to me where I'm also in an environment where my identity is not only respected but also celebrated, and it's very important for me as I continue to do the work on coming out that I'm not in a news organization which is okay with disseminating news that uses my identity as a political football
And for those who are interested
or
to,
for the sake of like clicks on a headline.
for those who are
Mm.
interested more to hear your program, what's the name of your show?
It's simply called the Monday Breakfast Show on 3CR. We obviously broadcast live from 7 to 8:30, 5 days a week. 5 days a week. I'm only on the Monday show.
Mhm.
We broadcast live. It's 8:55 a.m. It's not FM radio. It's AM. We you can also find us on the Community Radio Plus app, which if you don't have a radio nearby, because who has a radio nearby these days? Um, you can just listen to that anywhere you are. But we also upload every broadcast that we do onto our website as a podcast. Um, and there are so many great shows on 3CR. I really encourage your listeners to just have a look at the shows available, and I guarantee there'll be something for them.
And that's why I'm super excited because as a teacher, although I'm not teaching at the moment, as a secondary
Mm,
school teacher, loving media and English, I would recommend all teachers to get their students to, listen to, especially your show and the morning show, record, listen how it's constructed, how information is delivered, and then
mm,
compare that to, say, another radio station, a commercial, and look at the biases. Because I, for one, have loved, and I am biased. This is my bias coming out.
mm.
3CR has been in my life, for over, since the 80s. So we're talking about 40 years
Yes.
because it's part of my identity, and I've always wanting information that's true and not, that's not being
Mm,
bombarded with the propaganda by certain conglomerates. But being careful on that note, but that's so important. And also, and the work now, Rob, if people were watching you, researchers were interested, that maybe they're working on part of their PhD. At the moment, I'm looking at doing a poster. I've got to do a poster presentation or something. And I'm thinking, am I delivering that message right? Is that something
Mm.
that journalists like yourself can be hired or consulted with to assist researchers in?
Yeah, definitely. I think anywhere in the world where people are disseminating messages to an audience, big or small, the how it's created and what it says or is a very important thing that I think needs a lot of careful consideration. Um, and it is a big reason why journalism exists.
Rob, it's been wonderful speaking with you. And we're going to put your media links on our
Mm,
bio link on our website, because I would really encourage a lot of people who are listening to, connect you on LinkedIn and also,
mm.
reach out for chats, because in an era now where we've got fact checking, but also getting our information out there to our audiences. Because people are using TikTok, the 3 minute thesis grab. We need people like Rob who are really trained really to look at, is your information delivering to the audience you want most impactful? It's worth consulting someone like Rob. So, Rob, thank you
Yep.
so much for spending some time with us on our Voices
Mm.
series.
Thank you, Ricky. It's been great. It's been really great to really just get into how different the news that we make is and the choices behind it. I should also add that anyone listening out there who wants to see some of my work can obviously find me on LinkedIn. But I also have an Instagram account, which I've literally just recently launched. You can find that at Rob on the News.
There you go, everyone. So there, and I would encourage every teacher, school teacher, to who's teaching this and students to connect with Rob on that and follow the journey, and maybe ask questions, and pose questions to Rob. What would you think about this topic, or and then listen to his show to get ideas about what you think is where you want to know. Thank you so much, Rob, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, sorry, but are you there, Rob?